Hey, and welcome to the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. This is Willem Vanderhorst, your host for the show. So we have a great episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're a returning listener, thank you for listening again. If it's your first time, welcome to the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. Just as a quick reminder, this is an audio show in which I have quite candid conversations with a variety of different creators, really looking into what is their story, what had them create what it is they do create. And I tend to talk to quite a few people in marketing and advertising because that's the area where I work, and people who are in game design because I really like play and games. But not only, I branch out, but tonight we do stay around the area of game design. And one of the things I really like is independent creators. And last year I was browsing Kickstarter, the crowdfunding platform, and I came across Thomas Brush. And Thomas created this game called Pinstripe, and he was running a crowdfunding campaign for the game, and I really liked what I saw in the video. He is 27 years old, I believe, this year. So, I mean, in my book, pretty young. And he's been working for several years by himself on this video game called Pinstripe that was released a few months ago now on Steam, and is going to be released in a few months on consoles such as PlayStation and Xbox. And it's a beautiful, well, I believe beautiful storytelling, atmospheric game with a quite serious topic, but you kind of play through the game. And we talk about that in more detail during the episode. And I reached out to Thomas after I played the game myself. So I supported the game on Kickstarter last year. The game came out a few months ago. I finally got around to playing it. I really enjoyed it. I reached out to Thomas. Thomas said, yes, let's have a conversation. And this is where we're going now. Generally, the sound is pretty good. There's only a couple of moments where it just kind of fades out a tiny bit, I think. But overall, pretty good sound. So should be all right. And just quick plug. Don't forget that you can review the show. It makes a hell of a difference for other people to find the show. You can review it on Apple Podcasts. You can give it a thumbs up on Stitcher, or just share it with your friend. Share it with a friend of yours if you really enjoyed it. You can find all the backlist of episodes either on your favorite podcast app or on icecreamforeveryone.net. That's the www.icecreamforeveryone, everything spelled out, .net. You can also find my weekly newsletter there, the Ice Cream Sunday newsletter, that I've recently changed the format. It's just like really 2 stories, 2 links that I found interesting, and the reasons why I believe they have a link with each other, or why, what I just kind of make up why I was interested in those 2 and what links them in one way or another. I might be repetitive. Anyway, equally, it makes a hell of a difference if you give me feedback for the show. May it be on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is ICWillem. That's the letters I, C, and Willem, WILLEM. Or you can look up the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast page on Facebook and post a comment there. Give it a like. Any kind of feedback, or even just by email, you can send me an email at Willem, WILLEM, at icecreamforeveryone.net. Anything, like really just taking a moment, telling me what you like, dislike about the show makes a huge amount of difference to supporting me and just encouraging me, because I know that you're out there. Because I mean, I get download statistics, so I know how many people download the show that I presumably imagine they listen to it. I know that myself as a podcast listener, I listen to pretty much everything I download. It's rare that I stop in the middle. I almost listen to everything I download all the way through. I'm guessing that's a majority of people, not everybody, of course. But yeah, so if you download, just give me a sense of how much you like it and post a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps other people find the show. Without further ado, here's the conversation I had with Thomas. Thank you. Hey, Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going, man?
It's going great. Thank you very much. Just like rushing back to be right on time for a recording, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too, man.
Excellent.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great. So for a little bit of context for everyone, so as people who listen to the show know, I'm into gaming and I'm into play, but video games is not something I put a lot of attention on in the past few years. However, I do like Kickstarter, I do like crowdfunding, and I do like indie games, so I keep an eye on things going on. And sometimes even if I don't play any of the or much of the major games, I still watch trailers and read reviews. And I can't remember how I came across Pinstripe on Kickstarter, but that's how I first found out about you during the Kickstarter campaign a couple of years ago.
Right.
It was a couple of years ago, right? Yeah.
It was actually, let's see, April of last year.
Okay, last year.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. And I'm trying to, this is so bad because I've been scrambling to get ready for this. And of course, I never have as much time as I want to be ready for this,
That's
for
all
these
right.
conversations, but I'm trying to remember how I came across the campaign. And I think it was just one of the suggested campaigns to look at on Kickstarter while I was browsing. And I really liked the look and feel of it. I really liked your video and liked the presentation, and the fact that you're working on the game by yourself. And fast forward to just like a few weeks ago, and I was catching up on all the different rewards I had, and I hadn't played a video game in, I don't know, I'm not gonna say it because it's embarrassing for somebody who like interviews game designers.
Well,
but Pinstripe's the last game I played now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't play. I think some people might know this, but like I don't play video games very often. I think this year I played Hollow Knight. And Firewatch, and that's been really all I've played for like 2 or 3 years. So
well, when you're putting a lot of the time, you're putting
a
lot of the time in designing your own game. I can only imagine.
I really did, but yeah.
But let's start a little bit at the beginning for anybody who doesn't particularly know you or your work, who might be listening to this. Let's go from the beginning, Thomas. So where are you from? Well, where are you from?
Yeah. So I am in Greenville, South Carolina. It's like this small, quaint little, it's like a haven almost, kind of like the Shire. It's just so beautiful, really nice. And I was in Seattle last week actually. And, it's funny because everyone was like, you own a video game studio and you're in South Carolina. Like, why are you doing that? And it's just because it's been my hometown. I love it here. And like, I have this weird dream of like making South Carolina, like, you know, kind of like a video game city. So that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome. I've never been around there, down the south. I'd love to come and visit at some point.
Yeah, don't come visit this week because I think Hurricane Irma is coming up pretty fast.
Actually, that was one of the things I was going to ask about. I don't know about the exact path coming through, but so is it expected to come as high as North Carolina?
South Carolina.
Carolina, sorry.
Well, yeah, so I'm like right at the tip of South Carolina. So I don't know, you know.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying, but it's not going to be bad for us. We never really get it bad, but yeah, Florida and I think Alabama or Florida and Georgia might get it pretty bad, but
yeah, I've seen some of the photos of like I'm French, so like I got some French news updates that come, like the French Caribbean islands that got hit, and
yeah, just
on the back of what happened in Houston is pretty crazy. So I mean, I hope the people in Florida are going to be okay, but we'll see. But back to, I don't know how I segued back to the game, but back to the game. So you're in North Carolina, so what kind of upbringing did you have down there? What kind of?
It's kind of like, okay, so like everyone thinks of the South as like, you know, this racist sort of messed up society and it's super uber religious. And I'm sure that kind of stuff is there, but it's actually an incredible culture and place to live. Everybody here is like incredibly nice. That's why it's so hard to leave. So yeah, I mean, it's a really nice place. It's part of the Bible Belt. And so there's like 1 million churches, I can probably count, I could see a church out my window, but I can probably count 5 churches like within a mile of where I live. So it's a very religious area. So for better or for worse, wherever you swing, that's just the way it is here. And it certainly has influenced my work. Again, for better or for worse, it's just sort of runs through my blood because I've lived here since I was born.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it must be, and I'm looking forward to find out about the South as well. Just, so I was born in the States, but I grew up and spent most of my life in Europe and
awesome.
And in Asia. And
right.
I just recently moved back to the States. And I was telling somebody recently that I was surprised and a bit, so I'm having these shocks sometimes because I expect that I know a lot about the States, but I don't really.
Yeah.
And then when I have these kind of culture shock moments when I realize that I don't really know anything about much of the states, and that it's a gigantic country and there's many different cultures based on where you are.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing, you know. I got to hang out with some really cool people in Seattle at PAX. One of them, I think both of them were from Denmark, and one of them was originally from Iceland. And it's funny how, like, politically things are just totally different in places like Denmark. And when you try and discuss those political sort of topics, in the States, you're going to get such a mixed bag of conversations, and a ton of different people are passionate about so many different things that it's really hard to take something as simple like as healthcare in Denmark, for example, and try and implement it and to discuss it in the United States. It's much more difficult and different. So the United States it's a mixed bag of totally a ton of different beliefs and ideas. And I think that's why Pinstripe is kind of thrived the way that it did, is everyone is super, I guess, like interested in something like a minister going to hell, you know, regardless of people's beliefs. It's sort of just runs through the blood of the United States. Religious topics are just they're pretty much ingrained in the society and in the society's history. So it's automatically kind of an interesting game. You know what I mean? Yeah,
no, absolutely. And that was one of the things I was going to point to that I was surprised by, is how much just people talked about going to church and their beliefs and religion, and this probably is also down to the place where I grew up, which I grew up in a family that was absolutely not religious,
right? Even
actually bordering over the line of being anti-clerical and atheist. But
very different families, you and I.
Apparently. And so I said that to a couple of people in Chicago who were like, well, actually, you should go and check out down south. People really don't talk much about religion. If you think this is a lot, that would be quite interesting to go down there. So,
yeah. I mean, the topic of sweet tea is like identical to the topic of, like, you know, the virgin birth. Like they're going to integrate, and the conversations are going to overlap. It's just all the time there's discussions of either, did you go to church on Sunday, or sweet tea or fried chicken. So they're all together. It's crazy, but I'm in this sort of bubble in South Carolina, and that's Greenville, which is, it's people wonder why I don't have a Southern accent. It's not like a northern part of the state or anything. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, people here in this part of South Carolina don't have accents, and we don't have all the typical things about the South that people might frown upon.
Okay.
So it's a really awesome city, and it's growing like crazy. It's one of the number one growing cities in America, actually. I don't know how high on the list it is, but it's up there for sure.
And so, pardon my ignorance, and I've heard, what is sweet tea? Is it just like iced tea, or is it special recipe?
So it has so much sugar in it that it gives you kidney stones. And I have had a kidney stone, and I don't know if it was because of either Pinstripe or sweet tea, or maybe both. Like sweet tea is just like chock full of sugar, and it's delicious, but it's horrible for you. But yeah, I mean, it's what everybody drinks. So in the North, it's unsweetened tea. In the South, it's sweet tea, and I guess in Europe, it's just hot tea, right?
Hot tea mostly. But so I lived in the UK for a long time, and they have many different types of teas. I was traveling in the countryside with friends at some point, and we should have cream tea. It's one of the things from here. And and until it was served to the table, and then they laughed at me because I was like, so where's the cream tea? And I didn't understand that cream tea is like 5:00 tea. It's not that you put cream in the tea. It's that the tea comes with this, that the tea is drank at like 5:00, and it comes with a scone with heavy cream that you put on it with jam. And it doesn't go in the tea. So it's not, I thought it was a special recipe.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do tea.
It was confusing when they were like, what kind of tea do you want? I was like, I want the cream tea. They were like, but what kind of tea do you want? Do you want Earl Grey? I was like, I don't know. It's like, what kind of tea should it be?
You know, to segue this to just to video games in general, like whenever I go to like PAX, I don't know if you've ever been to PAX, but like,
no, I haven't.
Whenever I go to PAX or like E3 or something, it's just incredible
how anybody who's not into games, there's a big video game conference.
Yes. PAX was in Seattle last week, and like it was insane. Like the hotel prices were just through the roof. But anyway, I mean, it's a huge event, and you just meet so many incredible people. It's amazing how video games can bring people from all over the place. I can't tell you how many people I met from Europe who went all the way to Seattle, just to hang out with like the crazy Americans and the video game industry. It was just really cool.
I'm looking forward to that. All right, so and then other highlights of either, I don't know what kind of like teenage years did you have, or influences, maybe the music or things like that?
I think I hit this hormonal like craziness in high school, like most teenagers, but like I sort of capitalized on the typical like hormones of a teenager, and I found sort of a niche and an art style in those years. So I was 18 years old when I released my first game. And that was called Coma. And Coma, I mean, if you look at Coma, it looks like Pinstripe, and it looks like my next game. So I found a voice when I was 18 years old, and it was probably it was like kind of emo, kind of dark, kind of Tim Burton-y. And it just worked for me, and it still works for me, even though I'm 27 now. But like in those years, I found my voice. And I've kind of been capitalizing on that ever since, creatively capitalizing on it. So basically, anytime I'm struggling creatively, I'll just sort of try and access those deep, sort of weird emotions that you would typically get when you're younger. And I'll apply those to what I'm working on. So my next game is called Once Upon a Coma, and it's actually a sequel to my first game. And so I'm basically looking into those innocent, weird teenage feelings, and I'm taking those and reapplying them into this game, if that makes sense.
That's great. And the drawing or the artwork, is that something that came first, or where did the idea of doing games start? Actually, you know what?
Yeah, so I did. Do you know? I mean, there's a website called Newgrounds.com, and Newgrounds.com is it's like the YouTube for Flash. So Flash was the tool that everybody was using to make animated content and Flash content. And so this was like 10, 15 years ago. But Newgrounds.com, I started releasing animations because I'd make animations like during the summer and stuff when I didn't really have any friends. I would just make animations. And this was like in high school. So I would make animations, and I got people were like responding to them, and they were kind of going viral. And I was thinking, wow, like what if I could make a game? So I released a game when I was a senior in high school, and it did go viral. I mean, it blew up online, and it was like the weirdest feeling, because I never thought of myself as someone who could make creative content that influences people on such a large scale. So that was when I first got into video game development, and I've been kind of like addicted to the high of releasing games ever since.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. And the feeling of like, did you get a lot of, well, if it went viral, I mean, you must have gotten a lot of either accolades or opinions or comments, which can go completely crazy online as well.
They can. How was that? It was fine. So no one was critical, which is odd. Everyone on the Newgrounds site, on Newgrounds.com, is like really positive. I don't know how it is now, but like they're really, really positive. And it won Best Audio at South by Southwest it was like a smaller event at South by Southwest in Texas. And that felt really cool. So it won some awards. It also won Best Indie Game by Mochi, and Mochi's out of business now, but so it won some awards, and it was a cool thing. I mean, what's crazy is that success, or quote unquote success, is really fun for a while. But the problem with success is that it starts to become who you are. It becomes your identity. And so the moment you don't have it, you just crave it more. And then when you spend 5 years, for example, 5 years on Pinstripe, and then you release it, it's like letting go of like the most cherished thing you have. And so for me, regardless of how Pinstripe performed on Steam, I think it performed as well as it could have. It's doing pretty good right now, in terms of sales and a audience's response. But no matter what the response would have been, it's like watching like a beautiful vase is the only way I can think of it, that I'm holding in the palm of my hand, that I like essentially worship. my dream of making games, it's like watching it fall to the floor in pieces. So that's just the nature of giving your entire heart and soul into a project and then revealing it to the world. And it always, like, I've never released a game and not felt depressed like for 2 months after. It's just the way it goes for me. So it's tough. I mean, making games is like this really amazing high, and then and then you get sort of sucked into these lows. And I think I'm at a point now emotionally, especially for my next game, where I just want to make a game because it's fun. I don't want to do it because it's part of my identity or somehow makes me successful or cool. I just want to make it because it's fun. Yeah. You know?
That's great. Yeah. And it's, so I was thinking about a couple of other things when I was preparing for this. And one of them, which I've talked about with another person on the show, was the indie game documentary.
Yeah.
Because you're solo, like you've created this whole game by yourself. And actually, by the way, before we go further, maybe just to make sure everybody's listening is on the same page, if you could just describe, because you've done a little bit, but describe the Pinstripe project, how it started and what the game is about, just to make sure everybody knows, and then I'll pursue that question perhaps.
Right. So the whole Pinstripe thing did start, I mean, kind of with the indie game documentary. So you see people on the indie game documentary talking about how they've made $1 million and like they did it all by themselves. So I was inspired by that, as many millions of people probably were. So I decided to spend 5 years. I didn't plan on it, but it happened. I spent 5 years working on Pinstripe, which is about this ex-minister who goes to hell. And it's like this really Tim Burton-y type flash game, or not flash game, platformer that I released on Steam, and it's coming to console in January. So it's a very narrative driven game. It's very heartfelt. It's very personal. And it's very different than a typical game. Like typical games have gamey things in them, like, I don't know, like upgrades and a ton of enemies and stuff. So Pinstripe is different. And I think that's why it took so long to make. It has a different feel to it, and it's almost like a movie.
Yeah. And that's what I enjoyed, the vibe, the design, and something that I discovered when I actually played it recently, that it's quite a meaningful, kind of possibly serious theme and topic, but also transposed halfway into a fantasy world. In that sense, it kind of made me think of Pan's Labyrinth as well.
Right. Yes. And I'm a big fan of who did that? Del Toro.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of his work as well. So that is certainly an inspiration for Pinstripe. It's definitely dark, gothic. It's like a combination of the beautiful and the uncanny, and you merge the two. And that's where I always have intersections in terms of art style. It's always uncanny, dark, and a bit kind of like horror. And then it mixes with the beautiful emotion and drama. And for me personally, that's where I always get a lump in my throat with storytelling, is when there's just darkness and then light, and you cross the two. That's kind of my niche.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating one, and like certainly contrasts works. So when you got started, so you were inspired. Actually, it's interesting to see that you were inspired by the documentary and taking on that kind of project by yourself. Because honestly, I one of my best friends and I had dreams about making video games, but we ended up like not really doing much. I went to design school, and I think at like the height of anything I've done creatively on that, not anything, I'm exaggerating, but it's like I ended up doing a 3D animation of a spaceship that was morphing through a tunnel or something. But like all of the projects we had of making video games just never really came to much fruition, aside from like playing around with StarCraft maps and stuff like that. But although I did a lot more on the tabletop gaming side of things than video games personally.
Oh, cool.
But so doing that for 5 years, and did you have like a job at the same time, or were you doing that full time?
Yeah. So I was doing everything that you shouldn't do if you want to make a video game. So I was in college. I was in college when I started at Clemson University.
What were you studying?
Graphic communications, which is basically like print and packaging, which I don't know why I did that. I'm thankful for the degree, but it was kind of weird, like a weird degree to get. I think I just did it just to do it.
Yeah.
But in the off hours, I wasn't really partying with friends or anything. I mean, I wasn't even really making many friends. I was in the basement of Clemson University's library making Pinstripe. And then once I graduated from college, I got married, and then started a job as a graphic designer. And I had that job for 3 years and went through this just a weird dark phase where like all I wanted to do was make games, and I felt so limited. And you know, my wife will tell you it was this almost obsession of trying to, I guess, maybe prove to myself that I could get a ticket out of the marketing industry and into the game industry, and I can do it all on my own. So it was working constantly off hours. So for Pinstripe, especially when I was working a full-time job, I would get up in the morning, work for an hour, go sit in traffic, and then get to work. And then I'd work through lunch. And then I'd come home and I'd work an hour. So I'd try and get in 3 hours a day outside of my day job. And my wife was gracious enough to sort of cheer me on, and you know, those first 3 years of our marriage were interesting because I had prioritized Pinstripe not above my family, but pretty close. And I think she knows that. And it was really hard, and I wouldn't recommend doing that ever. But it certainly paid off in the sense that now I can do it full time.
Right. And what would you say, because it seems to be really like at this point a creative and artistic expression to be creating games. And I think it was in the Time review where you're introduced as auteur Thomas Brush.
Yeah.
And wondering, where did you get the idea, or why? I don't know if the why is a good question, but why games versus another type of artistic expression for you?
Okay, so getting into the film industry is like near impossible. I don't think we need to go into that, but like getting into being in charge of a project in the film industry is insanely hard, and it's so expensive. So these production companies aren't going to trust someone like me to do that. But video games, this indie game market is incredible. It's so cool because anyone with willpower and talent can go in and tell a story on their own and essentially prove themselves to industry executives from the comfort of their own home. And it's so cool because all of a sudden, by the way, my end goal is to get into film. But it's interesting because I've been able to have conversations with people in the film industry because of Pinstripe. So I think deep down, maybe it's easier in hindsight, but deep down, I think I knew that if I wanted to be as expressive with my creativity as possible and utilize sort of the talents I've been blessed with, I figured why not do it in a media, in a type of media that has music, illustration, design, and storytelling all in one package. Yeah. And you can do it from the comfort of your own home.
That's fantastic. And I think it's awesome. And I love the we talk about, and there's a lot of articles about the fact that the computer and a lot of other stuff have made the means of creation, accessible, democratized for everyone so that everybody can do that from the comfort of their own home. And it's such an expression that it's absolutely correct. Now it takes something. It doesn't come free necessarily. Yeah. So I just watched, you just published recently a video to tell other people, like how easy it is to get the right tools to do this. Yes. Even for me, like to at my own level, like doing the podcast, some people are like, "Oh my God, I really want to do this." I'm like, "Oh, it's not difficult. I just Audacity, which is the sound editing program, is free. That's what I use, which you also talk about in your video." Mm-hmm. I certainly definitely admire that because a bit of the side of like designing a game like you doing and have done, which is a bit of a renaissance, man, because it does touch a bunch of stuff. So it touches music, it touches design, it touches creativity. And which is the part that you would find yourself like that you either like the most or have the most practice or versus the least? And like, what are the kind of challenges you found
So
different sides of it.
What parts of game development do I like the most and thrive in the most?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I thrive the most in the music portion, just because I don't know, like when I can look, I'm lucky. I'm really lucky. Like sometimes when I talk, I sound like I'm being like proud, but it's just because I was born with a couple gifts, and one of those was the ability to take a visual and then put music to it. And I think that's the forte of my projects, and that is the music for some reason makes sense with the visuals. So that's kind of my forte. I think if I was going to take one thing though, if I had a genie in a lamp and he said, you can have anything you want, the one thing I would take is I would want to be a screenwriter or a director of some kind, because I want to tell stories. I have a lot to say, and most people have a lot to say.
Yeah.
And I think that I've recognized now that when I tell people, like, it's crazy because when I tell friends what I believe, or when I tell friends how I feel, when it comes out of my mouth, it's not that great. But then when I put it into a video game, or I put it into an animation or a song, then it's convincing and people listen, right? And that's the beauty of art, which is you can tell a static, boring debate, or you can tell a simple conversation point, but if you tell it in a beautiful way, suddenly it's convincing. So I think that's what I would take and use in my future career, is just being able to tell stories in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. And so we mentioned the theme a little bit, which is quite a serious one of the game. Is it like, Reverend going through hell? And I don't know what the next game is about too much, but it's called Once Upon a Coma. So like you're immediately in the title wondering, like, it sounds like a serious topic to approach.
Yeah.
Which I've seen that happen in a few different games. Is that, where would you say that, that kind of ideas of trying to mix the serious topics with fantasy and gaming came together?
Yeah. So for me personally, I do get fed up with games that don't really address anything. They don't really address simple topics. Like there's like, I'll see some ads of, it's basically just totally like, just, I can't think of the right word, but it just like overstimulates, oversexualizes women and it's violent and gory and all this. And like, I'll play violent games, but I think it's such a disgrace almost if the entire industry is just full of that crap. So my thought process is, and this is what I think most indie developers, their thought process is, hey, I actually want to stand for something. I actually want to believe something and tell people my story. I'm going to do it. And I think indie developers know you can't really do that in corporate America, in the corporate video game industry, unless you get really lucky and find like an incredible like publisher like Double Fine or something. You can't tell these deep personal stories with these AAA games. Now, some games do, like The Last of Us, for example, absolutely 100%. BioShock, those kinds of games, they tell incredible stories. But for me, I'm going to with what little time I have, not only on Earth, but however long my studio stays, functioning and operational, then I'm going to spend that time making something that I feel is meaningful. And I don't pretend to be the only person that does that. Like every indie developer I can think of wants to make something, meaningful. And it's kind of a revolt, I think, against typical mainstream games.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Totally. No, it's fantastic. It's great. Totally answers my question.
Yeah.
And just to the earlier answer you gave on the music side of things, I really, really like the music in Pinstripe as well. So
thanks.
And you were saying in your video that apparently the Logic Pro really helps with the music. But I was going to ask also about coding, because that's something that I don't know. I imagine that's necessary in playing, designing games. So did you learn how did you approach coding? Did you learn by yourself? Is that something that you found difficult to get into, or?
Yeah, I don't like coding. It's kind of like it's like a necessary evil if you don't have a budget to hire someone. So for Pinstripe, that thing, if someone was able to look at the code, which I'm sure someone can, they would be very unimpressed. It's jerry-rigged and slapped together in so many bad ways. But I learned coding just out of necessity because I knew I wanted to tell a story. I knew I didn't want to invest all that time and energy in like a full-length animated film. So basically I ended up saying, okay, I'm going to make a game and I need to learn how to code it. So I learned how to code, and the unfortunate thing is I don't like coding as much as I do, but it's the part of the project that took the longest. Yeah. So fortunately for Once Upon a Coma, which is the next game I'm working on, I'm actually working with a team of developers that work for a different company, but they are partnering with me.
Right.
So
you can focus on the design and the storytelling.
Yeah.
Right.
The things that I'm good at. Yeah. And they it's incredible because at first I was like, yeah, they're just going to do the development and that's that. But it's so incredible because when you have a team of really good developers, the game just grows so much faster and so much better, you know?
Right. Cool. So you said some of the stuff that is going to be coming up on Pinstripe is you're going to be launching on console in a few months?
Yes.
Do you think that's going to be like, I imagine it's going to be bringing the game to a whole other audience of perhaps more casual gamers?
I don't know.
Don't know?
I don't know. See, that's one of the hardest things. I used to be an emotional wreck, by the way, about game development in general, because the biggest problem with the game studios is it's so hard to project what something is going to be like on a certain platform. And you can do all the demographic research you want, but it's so hard to figure out how it's going to perform. And especially for these publishers and investors, they're investing in projects that they have no clue whether they're actually going to perform well or not. And the reason isn't because video games are just so crazy and no one can understand them. The reason is because the industry is like right now it's changing so fast, that you really can't predict. Like Pinstripe was originally for mobile. I built the game for iPad, and because that market changed like from under my feet, without me even knowing it, then suddenly I was like, wait a second, this seems like a waste of time. I don't think I can actually make any money releasing on the App Store. So that's when I shifted to Steam and console.
Right. That makes total sense, actually. Now that, I'm going to assume that what you mean by that is one of the things that changed massively in mobile is very few to little to no people now paying for games, and it all being on the Clash of Clans, Bejeweled type stuff where you have to play to get faster things. Yeah.
So trying to compete with like Bejeweled and Candy Crush. I don't even know what's popular.
Candy Crush, that's what I was thinking of.
And then whatever you said, the Clash of Clans, which is
I think there's a bunch like that, but just like basically we have an army, but you have to build things and pay things in.
So me competing with that is like Ouya trying to compete with PlayStation and Xbox. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to work. So I'm going to release on mobile eventually, just because it won't be too hard to do. But I'm not going to expect a dime from that, because there's the only way an indie developer can get noticed is that Apple themselves like the game and they put you on the front page.
Yeah. Like for example, do you know, you must know Monument Valley.
Yeah. They got noticed, and they should have. It was amazing. It was an incredible game.
So these are friends of mine, the studio, but they have they have a big design studio. When they launched Monument Valley, they didn't have a big game studio as a side project of theirs.
Right.
But they are designers in such a way. They didn't expect anything to come out of it, but they did really put a lot of time and effort and love into it. Yeah. And it was noticed by Apple, and it was noticed by House of Cards, for whatever reason that was on that TV show, right?
I saw that. When I saw that episode, I was like, man, if I was just faster with Pinstripe, that could have been me. But no.
But you can't really plan for that. You can do all the demographic research you want, and it doesn't really.
Like with Steam, like I projected in my head a certain number of sales, and we're generally hitting that. It's, part of me wanted to make $1 million, but, we can generally predict how Steam is going to do, barely. But things like the App Store and I have no idea about PlayStation and Xbox. Part of me feels like it's going to be a much better platform than Steam, because Pinstripe feels really good with a controller and a big TV. But we'll see. I'm hopeful, but we'll see.
Yeah. And by the way, it's just for anybody, because there are people who don't know, but Steam is how would you describe Steam actually?
Yeah. So Steam is, it's just, if you ever want to play PC and Mac games, like any game that you see on a PlayStation or Xbox is probably on Steam, and Steam just has all these games available for PC and Mac.
Yeah. I was going to ask you also, which I don't know, you might have already given the answer, given you said you're spending a lot of time just working on Pinstripe, but I was wondering other types of games, actually, sorry, I have the bad habit of asking 2 questions at once. Let me start with, did you read anything in terms of game design, or where did the principles or anything to do with learning how game design functions come from?
No. I didn't read anything, and I should have. Because Pinstripe did really well in terms of player reviews and news outlets enjoyed it, but it also got slammed a lot for certain things, like gameplay mechanics that were frustrating. So there are things that I could have learned and done better, and that's why I'm glad I'm partnering with this other company for the next game, because they're going to help me understand certain areas of my skill sets that fall short. Yeah. But if there's anything, I recommend this all the time, but there's one book I read that changed everything, and it wasn't about game design. It was about entrepreneurship, and it's this old book called Think and Grow Rich. And it sounds really like shallow, like it's all about making money, but really what the book is about, and it's like one of the top sellers for business, but it's basically about dreaming big and believing you can do something. And that sounds cheesy, but it's amazing how it works. So right behind me in my closet, there's a piece of paper on the floor that I wrote 4 years ago. And it said, in May, I'm going to make $60,000 selling a perfect game. And I put that on my wall, and I believed it. And what's crazy is, because of Kickstarter and pre-order sales, that number doubled. So there is something to be said about, like, a lot of people, they live in this mindset where, I don't know whether it's because of their parents or their family or how they were raised, but they live in this mindset where they think that they can't do something, or they don't have a skill set, or they don't have a specific talent. And my big question is, well, have you tried? Have you tried something? Cause you need to get to a point where you do believe in yourself in some way. Like for you, like you started this podcast, even though I doubt someone told you to do that. You just believed you could, you believed you could. And no one told me, maybe my dad was really encouraging, but nobody really told me, hey, Thomas, you can make video games. I just told myself I could. I just think people would be amazed how cause a lot of people have pretty crappy lives, and sometimes they feel like it's out of their hands. They feel like their career is out of their hands, and they have no control. They have too many kids, and the bills are piling up, and they have no control. But in reality, I think we have way more control than we think we do. And if we would just write down a goal, pin it to our wall, and actually make it happen, it would sort of give us this emotional strength to do bigger and better things. So that all came from Think and Grow Rich. It's an incredible book, and I recommend it to I recommended it to someone I got coffee with yesterday. I can't harp on that book enough, or recommend that book enough. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I was just listening to an episode of the TED Radio Hour today called A Better You, with different people that had like different things, techniques, strategies, stories about how they did. One of the ones I really enjoyed was a guy who was inspired by Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me, when he goes like to eat McDonald's for 30 days. And so so he decides to go and try things for 30 days in a row. And like whatever it is, he's like, I'm going to do, painting, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to just try something out for 30 days.
Right. And you figure out, I'm actually good at this. And my parents told me I wasn't, or my brother would make fun of me growing up about this, but I'm actually good at it. So for me, like I got a reasonable, like a tiny, tiny response to I started doing vlogging, and that's really scary to me because I'm kind of embarrassed about my personality. But I got people commenting and asking me about my career and what I think about stuff, and they liked the video and got like 500 views overnight, which isn't a ton, but it's more than I've ever had.
Yeah.
And it's cool to think, oh, I can actually do this. And all along I was scared to.
Yes.
And so when it comes to video game development for me, it was a huge, it wasn't an ego booster, but it just made me feel stronger to know that I can do a lot of things that I thought I couldn't. And I do want to share that message with other people who just live in this life of insecurity. You can't change your insecurity by somehow like it just changing overnight and like hoping that you won't be insecure. You have to prove to yourself through failures and successes that you actually can do stuff. And those basically are notches on your belt. And it's basically like no pain, no gain. If you don't fail at something,
yeah,
or you don't try something, you're never going to know what you can actually succeed at.
Yeah, for sure. That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's a couple of other thoughts that inspires me, and questions along that. One of them is, so you talked earlier about like once it's released and there's certain periods and times where like it's quite emotionally tough to be either doing this whole project by yourself or like how it's received. Is there anything else that you did or that you recommend to help yourself pick yourself back up or get yourself out of the emotional whatever world that was occasionally happening?
Yeah. How did I get through that? Well, okay, so like I guess relentlessness is the best thing that I can say. So I failed in terms of like getting Pinstripe noticed by the press and by like festivals and competitions. I failed a lot. Like I'd submit my game constantly to like festivals and I'd reach out to press. Hey, what do you think about this game? And constantly it was just silence. But the resilience eventually got something, right? It's like, if you continually, like let's say you throw out 1,000 seeds in your backyard and it's, let's say you have a really bad season. Well, one of them's going to grow. So like one of those seeds grew and that was, Unity, the software that I use to make my game. It's like the biggest video game software in the world right now. And Unity reached out to me and said, hey, we really want to tell your story, at the Game Awards, which is this huge, huge award show. And like Mark Hamill hosted it that year. And I was like, oh, really? And they're like, yeah. So they flew a film crew out and filmed me and my story. And that was really cool. Cause like that was a really low point in my career because I thought I was wasting my time. I wasn't going to give up, but I felt like I was going to give up. And those kinds of things kept me going, which was small successes in the midst of failure. And that's my whole point in my previous point, which is you have to pursue failure if you want to succeed because you're going to fail more than you succeed. I think that should be like a general rule. Yes. But if you're not pursuing anything, you're never going to succeed.
Yeah.
So those successes were what kept my chin up for sure.
Yeah. And that's great because it's always difficult because sometimes it may sound a little bit generic, but it's so true and it's also where life happens.
Absolutely.
Just like the only place in time you're going to be able to feel the full range of emotions and excitement and everything else, or let's say, falling in love, and that also means risking having your heart broken. But yes. If you don't do that, there's no gain either.
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in this weird, like dark, I don't know if it's dark, but like, life is the essence of failure because we're all gonna, keel over.
Yeah.
So life is the essence of failure, but there's beauty in the midst of failure. So just fail. Have fun failing. Get used to it because it's going to happen. There's going to be trouble in your life. Get used to it.
The having fun is key. The fact that it's possible to have fun and fail, or it's possible to. Somebody was just telling me a story the other day of that they was somebody they knew, a little girl they knew was going for the first day of kindergarten, and she looked nervous, and he just smiled and said, it's kind of fun to be nervous, isn't it? And then she completely changed and smiled at him, and she was like, "Oh yeah, it is."
Yeah, it's a weird bodily reaction, but it's funny when you suddenly step outside of yourself and look down at yourself. You realize that you're not a failure; you just failed, and you say, "Hey, I'm going to learn from that. I'm actually going to take that failure and I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to keep my chin up and be proud of that failure." So that's kind of my philosophy on things. And it's funny, whenever I do these podcasts, I end up always talking about like the emotional component of art creation. And I think it's because personally, I had to push through so much crap, emotionally to finally get to the point where I could release a game. It was a huge emotional battle. And even post launch, 2 months after launching Pinstripe, like I discussed, that was an emotional wreck. And that's actually what my next game is about. My next game focuses on depression and stuff, and basically reigniting that passion you have when you're a kid, that innocent passion you have when you're a kid. So, it's an emotional roller coaster for sure.
That's cool.
To be creative in general. It's always an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And it's ultimately not that surprising, because a lot of the heart of, it feels like Pinstripe is just like generating and evoking a lot of emotions for me, which I think is like a good piece of art. And there was another thought I had, which was, I thought I'd share and mention. I'm in the middle of this book called The Gift.
I think I've heard of that. What is that about?
The Gift is about, so I think the subtitle is like creativity and art and the artist in the modern world or something like that.
Okay.
But the author looks through cultures of gifting and starts talking about the difference and comparing and contrasting the difference between a gift economy and a commerce economy. So like a money economy. Right. And one of the big things that shifts is like if you create something, and it's felt like what you described, but from going from creating something and like art, where you put a lot of your soul and a lot of your emotions and everything into it. But then in your case, in the case of Pinstripe, then you release it to the world, but you release it to the world in a market economy that you're hoping is going to make money and pay bills.
Yeah.
But that's not that's not exactly what you put into it in the first place, even though you kind of think about it.
Yeah.
But, all of a sudden,
it's a messed up, I don't know if there's a way to fix it, but it is messed up because, what it does is it changes the way in which you create. You say, okay, that didn't go as well as I wanted it to. Pinstripe did fine, but sometimes I've released projects where it didn't go as well as I wanted. And I say, okay, well, how do I change that next time around? Well, let me focus on the audience more than what I actually want to share from my heart.
Exactly.
So it becomes less personal. And I think time and time and again, we've seen that in like commercialized products. The moment you start thinking about money, it waters down the whole thing.
Yep.
So. And
then again, it just powers the whole thing too. So it's like tough. All right. Great. And just so we're going to get down to the wrapping this up, just conscious of time. And like I usually finish with a few cool down questions.
Okay.
Starting with is still the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. And I usually like to talk about ice cream. And starting with, I don't know, do you have a favorite flavor?
No, well.
Or if you don't like ice cream, sometimes it happens. People are like, oh, I don't like
I just threw away 2 cartons of ice cream because I'm really into like fitness right now. So like I'm going through like the quote unquote cutting phase where like you have to trim off fat so that the muscle you built through the bulking phase actually shows through. So I went through the cutting phase and I threw out all the ice cream in my house. But if there was a favorite, it would probably be vanilla. Just Great. Vanilla. Yeah.
Cool. And so I was also wondering about other types of games. Do you happen to, and maybe you just didn't have time for that at all, but play board games or tabletop games or social games or anything like that, or storytelling games?
Settlers of Catan. And then what's that game? Cards Against Humanity is fun to play with friends.
Yes.
And I think those are the only 2 games I've actually played.
Cool.
Yeah. And Cards Against Humanity was kickstarted as well, and they were their booth was next to mine. I got to go to a cool little Kickstarter convention. So it's really cool. Like if people want to look at tabletop games, Kickstarter is like full of them.
Yes, it is. It is. And actually, I've talked to one of the previous episodes, just like plugging in my own show, but I talked to Luke Crane, who's the head of games for Kickstarter, and that was also
cool.
a really fun conversation. Awesome. And Cards Against Humanity are here in Chicago. I got to go visit their offices to talk to another game designer who works out of there, but I don't really know the guys very well. I'd love to get to know them a little bit more. So we'll see. It's just I've only been here for a few months, but it'll happen soon. Cool. So, and what kind of timeline? I saw that the teaser for Once Upon a Coma just came out. What are you thinking of in terms of timeline for more news or release of that game? Or I'm expecting not right away, but I don't know.
No. Yeah. So we just finished up the demo for PAX. So that went really well. Timeline is sometime 2018. But we are pretty sure we're going to do another Kickstarter for it. So that Kickstarter will probably launch in January next year, I think, right alongside the console release of Pinstripe. So
great.
Yeah.
And is there anything where people can find you or watch out for, like your vlog or any other places to find out about you and your games?
Yeah. So all of my stuff is at atmosgames.com. So atmosgames.com. And they can follow me and look at my videos and check out my projects.
Fantastic. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for your time, Thomas. This was a great conversation. I had fun. Thanks.
Yeah, me too, Willem. Thanks.
All right. That's another episode of the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast wrapping up already. We're getting closer and closer to the end of the year. We've got more guests coming up and lining up more guests that are very exciting, and I'll see you soon. Yeah, as I said at the beginning of the show, don't hesitate to post a review on Apple Podcasts. That's your podcast app on your iPhone if you're an iPhone user, or iTunes if you're on your computer right now for whatever reason. And you can reach out to me on Twitter. That's ICVillem, letters I and C, Willem, WILLEM, or email WILLEM at icecreamforeveryone.net. On my website, you can find the weekly newsletter. That's the Ice Cream Sunday newsletter. You can just even type in Ice Cream Sunday. And that's about it. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. Have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, good night, whatever time it is, wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for your time. And that's about it. Thank you. Bye.